You're listening to Both Sides of the Stethoscope, where medicine meets the human heart. This podcast is hosted by me, Dr. Colby Salerno, a cardiologist, and my co-host, Dr. Alin, an ICU doctor. What makes our podcast unique? We've both had heart transplants. Join us as we blend our medical expertise with personal journeys, aiming to educate and foster understanding between doctors and patients. From cutting-edge medical discussions to personal reflections, welcome to a podcast that explores the heartbeat of healthcare and the shared experience that connects us all. Let's get on with the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Both Sides of the Stethoscope. I'm one of your hosts, Colby Salerno, here with my co-host, Alin.
Hi, everyone.
For tonight's episode, we are possibly releasing our first video episode, so we'll see if this shows up on YouTube. If it doesn't, it's because we just couldn't put it together in a good turnaround time. It's just going to be me and Alin tonight, and we're going to just be talking informally about things that we've learned from our patients, being patients ourselves, and navigating the healthcare system. So, Alin, I'm going to first send a question your way. And one of the things that I really noticed was I had my experience, and it certainly was, a nice reminder that every experience is kind of different. So how did you kind of navigate that with yours and then now dealing with critically ill patients?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question to start with. By the way, I'm really excited about this video component, so I really do hope it works out. So as far as the question goes, as you guys all know, me and Kobe had very similar experiences, but also very different in that everything that happened to me was very, very quick. Like, I don't think I even had time to process what was actually going on with me until like months after I was discharged. So, because of that, I feel like I went through a lot of craziness and chaos when I was hospitalized, and I took a lot away from it as well. And the more I'm about 6.5 years out, and the more I'm farther out from transplant, I feel like I reminisce about those days in the hospital, which by now I've forgotten a lot, but I do remember like little things that have helped me kind of understand the healthcare system, both as a patient and as a doctor. And one particular example that I tell a lot of people that really stuck with me back then when I was in the ICU and continues to stick with me nowadays that I actually am an ICU doctor. Um, there was a lot of difficulty with communication, and it's not that the bedside staff was doing a terrible job, or I just think in general, the healthcare system, um, all the docs and the providers who come in and out of the rooms, like, they're just trying to get their one task done, and it doesn't mean that they're not good, it just means sometimes we forget that, like, the person in front of us is an actual patient. And so one thing that I tell people is about the time when, my parents were there and I was sick waiting for my heart transplant. I think at that point I was already waiting, and the one of the docs came in and said something like, "Oh yeah, she's stable," and it was the ICU doctor who said that. And then a couple hours later, the heart failure team came in and said something like, "We're still, she's still not, pretty sick, and she's still going to need a heart transplant." And they said something along the lines of that. And then my dad looked at me and he was like, "Oh, but the ICU doctor is so much more positive. Like, I wish the cardiologist understood what the ICU doctor was saying." And like taking a step back, I understood what was happening, right? Like the ICU doctor's job is just to make sure that I'm stable. Like just to make sure that, there's no code, that I don't need more pressors. So when it comes to the intricate plan as far as what's going to happen to my heart transplant, the heart failure team said what they were supposed to. I still need a heart transplant. My dad took it as the ICU doctor said I don't need a heart transplant, and the cardiologist said I still do, and he thought of it as like not necessarily negative. He was like, I don't know why like they're so worried when the ICU is not. No, well, the ICU worries about different things. And so one thing that I've learned as a patient that I still take away is making sure that when I'm talking to patients, I am able to let them know what my goal is as an ICU doctor. I don't know the specifics of when you're going to start dialysis. I don't know the specifics of, outpatient follow up, but I do know that right now you're sick and you're going to need these medications and we're going to monitor you overnight. So making sure that doctors and nurses are aware of what their particular goal is when they're talking to a patient is really important because like you can see like in that one sentence my dad thought that what the ICU doctor was saying was that I was fine and everything, I didn't need a heart transplant anymore. So that's definitely something that I've learned a lot from, that hospitalization, and I kind of put into my own care now that I'm an ICU doctor. Has anything like that happened to you when you were hospitalized?
Yeah, no, that's really well put. I come, I guess, with a little bit of a different experience in terms of like what I've learned. First is, of course, like we said, our stories are similar but different, and that's that you had practiced medicine at least somewhat before you got your transplants. You had an idea of the system and everything, whereas um, I was 23 years old when I got hospitalized and 24 when I left the hospital, and didn't really understand the intricacies of a healthcare system. Um, that being said, one of the things that's been eye opening to me now that I'm caring for heart transplant patients as a heart transplant recipient, but as their doctor, um, is the real importance of leaving your biases at the door. Um, and that's even simple enough for me. Whereas, like, I think heart transplant's amazing, but that comes from somebody who has had a successful heart transplant for 13 years and, knock on wood, hasn't had any issues. Um, but then all of a sudden, I'll be talking with my patients and I'll present them the options of advanced therapies, and that's a heart transplant and an LVAD. And some of them will instantly just want the LVAD. And we're like, whoa, that's crazy. Transplants are amazing. I don't say that, but in my head, I had initially started to think that because of how well mine has gone. And it's like, you know what? Not everybody is interested in that. And some just want to get their LVAD and leave the hospital and hopefully not have to come back. They're not willing to sit in a hospital and wait for a new heart. You have people with unique perspectives of they're older and they don't feel like they want to have a young person die and give their heart to them. They want the heart to go to someone else, which is, a very interesting thing to hear as a physician where you think you're presenting them the best option. And they're like, nah, that's not for me. That's somebody else's. And so I've learned from these patients that everyone is unique, is really the big picture here. And they're going to do things that fit them. And we as physicians need to give recommendations, but guide them along the lines of what works best for their life and what their long term wishes and goals are.
Have you ever actually changed a medical decision based on someone saying like, "Oh, I'm not gonna do that"?
Yeah, I think specifically in the current climate of transplant and LVAD, LVADs are seen a lot of times, especially in older patients, as what we call destination therapy, meaning that people do very well on them. So the fact remains that by the time, if they were to need a transplant, they likely have gotten to a point, mostly age wise or other comorbidities, where they cannot get a transplant. So when a patient gets an LVAD, our biggest concern is, say, if they're like 65, is that's a destination therapy LVAD, regardless of if they would want a transplant in the future. And so we present them a lot of times as being like, hey, right now, unless we can in the future get patients with LVADs listed higher on the list if they've had one in for a certain amount of time, transplant is a better option for you. And I've had patients just say, nope, not for me. That's not what I want to do. And I've completely said, okay, this is a great option as well. And we'll do that instead. But going into the conversation thinking that transplant would be the better um, long term option for them. And they changed my mind because it's not what fits what they're looking to do with their life. I'll start by kind of saying something that really has um, been taught to me mostly by just patient interaction and something that I certainly felt as a patient, and then send it over to you for to kind of give your point of view on it. But that is mostly that trust is earned and like not assumed, and patients often understand that we have their lives in their hands and everything, but that they want to know that we like see them and not manage them. Um, and so, what I mean by that is you are more likely to have such a better patient physician interaction if you're going to be willing to sit and talk and discuss not just medicine, but people's lives with them. And this is, again, going back to what I just said previously, and that's about what their life goals are and what life after whatever they're dealing with is what they want it to look like, whether that's being in the ICU for sepsis or in the hospital for a transplant. It doesn't matter. Even if they're in their office, and they're there to see, me for a valve disorder, we'll say. Um, Big picture is getting to sit there and talk with them and build trust, eye contact,
Right.
and everything like that. And um, Aline kind of briefly mentioned this, but we live in a world right now where the healthcare system is the people who work in it are stretched very thin. And
Mhm.
sometimes they're running in and out of rooms doing the best they can. And a lot of that is instantly trying to do the right thing medically and then move on to the next situation. But a lot of times that will make patients feel like they are overlooked,
Right.
and that's not going to lead to trust in the physician. They don't care if you have the best test scores in the country or have been to the most prestigious medical schools. They care that you're in the room listening to them and talking to them about how to get them through their situation. And being stuck in a hospital for 6 months, as a patient, yeah, I mean, I just completely started to get glossed over, every single
Right.
day. I don't think nobody
Too
even
stable. Yeah.
yeah, too stable, like a wave as, like, groups of doctors around the room, and, which is fine, I totally understand that, but, the coming in on I remember residents still to this day, Dr. Nick Mead, if you ever were to listen to this, I think he's the, uh program director of cardiology at Geisinger now. But he was a fellow or resident at the time, and he
Oh,
came
that's
into my room
nice.
and just chatted with me. And he actually is one of the reasons I'm a DO because I didn't even kind of understand that you could be a DO and still do advanced heart failure and transplant. Just wasn't something I was in tune to at the time. And that's when I opened up my applications later on after my transplant to include MD and DO schools. Um, so that's just kind of one takeaway of something that happened to me as a patient that I brought with me as a physician.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that all the time. I mean, especially when I was a fellow, because that's when I was dealing with probably the sicker ICU patients, but ICU patients in general, like, we're barely even looking at the patient. We're looking at, like, their vitals, they're into they have all these like, they have a balloon, like, we're looking at everything other than the patient, and it's never meant to be I obviously, sometimes it probably comes off as terrible, but the reality is that, like, that's what we're looking at, that's how we're managing you. And so especially obviously if a patient's awake, then you're talking to them, but I would make it a point to try to talk to especially the younger patients. When I worked in transplant ICU, there was a younger patient who ended up needing an organ transplant pretty quickly, similar to my story. It was a different type of organ transplant, but I remember he had said something, like, as I was leaving, he's like I just went down and talked to him one night. Like, I told him about my story, I told him about the thing that I went through, and I wouldn't tell everybody because I never want a patient to feel like I'm taking over, like, their story and their journey that they're on, but this particular patient, I told him everything, and I said, "Hey, I'm here for you, I know it's difficult," and he had said something along the lines of, like, "This is the most helpful thing you've done, like, or anybody's done in these ICUs, just, like, to talk to me like I'm a patient." So, that really stuck with me for a long time. I still think about that, and sometimes just taking, like, a breath and talking to them and making sure that they're comfortable and, they understand their decisions and they understand what we're doing. It takes a lot, and I think it means a lot to our patients too. Um, I remember when I was hospitalized, they were talking about how they're gonna present me to, like, the transplant committee so they can make a decision on whether or not I can get a heart transplant, and, like, I thought that was kind of I was like, "Okay, so, like, are you gonna talk about, like, what kind of person I am, or are you gonna just talk about, like, my hemodynamics?" And they're like, "Oh, no, we're gonna talk about, like, you're a doctor, blah, blah, blah," but I remember thinking it was a kind of weird that they were just, like, objectifying, but again, I understand, like, why we do these things, but it meant a lot to me, and I continue to take that and try to remember that one sometimes we can't. Sometimes, the patient is literally, like, coding, and you're looking at all the monitors, and you're trying to figure out the numbers and everything that's going on in that moment, but patient's stable and they're talking and then they wanna talk to you for a few extra minutes, I think it's super important and it goes a really long way. Um, on that note, I guess this kinda goes with that, but I really like this one question, but, have you ever felt like there we probably already do this just because of our experiences, but do you ever feel like a patient has taught you how to be more human or taught you any experiences that you take with you for the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think, obviously, I try, as best as I can. I think more than anything now I find I, like, have to slap myself when I'm falling into bad habits of doing the things that, like, I would have been pissed at I was a patient, which is blowing people off or moving quickly room to room, just because you have a lot of work to do, um, and to me, it's easy as a physician to be like, "Yes, this is what I have to do to get done," but to the patient who's gonna see you once that day only,
Mhm.
they're gonna be like, "This is my doctor. This is how much he cares about me or she cares about me," or it's just like they gave me 2 minutes of their time. And I never you don't want to do that, and of course, I'm going to do it again. But I think it's important to try and give people that little bit of time. I think, the thing that patients have taught me, especially this last year where I've been, we just seeing transplant patient after transplant patient for the first time in my career, is how much, and I guess I am going to pat myself on the back a little bit here, is how much they resonate with a physician walking in who's been where they have. Um, and I think one of the simplest things that I've learned, is when I haven't experienced what a patient has, I find myself telling them, like, yeah, it's easy for me to be standing at the end of your bed, leaving tonight, going home to my family and telling you, like, this is what you need to do. And I've had patients tell me how much they appreciate me admitting that I don't know what they're experiencing. So I get a lot of credit from patients who are like, "Yeah, you know what it's like to get a biopsy and get a cardiac cath and all that." But when I tell patients like, "Hey, I've never experienced this, so I don't know what you're going through, and I know it's easy for me to
That's
just
just as
stand here and
important.
tell you this is what you should do," it's just as important to them, and they respect it a lot. And that I didn't know that going into it, and then they've told me that, and it's something that I've now brought with me to all the care. And I'm sure some patient one day is going to tell me like, yeah, no
You
shit.
should know.
And like maybe, yeah, and be annoyed with me or something. But that's human to human connection, which
Well,
is what
that's
medicine
also
truly is in the heart of it.
exactly. That's also it's cultural, it's culture and, like, generation dependent, right? Like, I feel like nowadays, I would love if a doctor told me, like, "I actually don't know what this is," right? But, like, someone in my dad's generation, like, he's like, "The doctor." I think I've explained this before, but when my dad once went to the doctor and he came home and he's like, "Oh, the doctor told me I can take whatever I want for it," and he asked if, like, he should be on steroids, and the doctor said, "Yeah, it's up to you." And my dad was like, "Does the doctor know, like, why does he keep giving me decisions to make? Like, they're the doctor, they should put me on whatever medication they think I need to be on." So, like, there definitely is a generational difference. Like, I don't if a doctor tells me they don't know, I respect that 100 times more than if they pretended like they knew something. But I also have been in that position. I know you don't know everything, and I understand that medicine is gray, which not everybody does. So I feel like it's generational and, like, cult culturally dependent, if that's the right way to put it, on, how much you should, like, say you don't know or you know. But I do feel like in general, patients are much more happy with you if you just admit that, like, you don't know how something feels, you don't know the answer to this, this is a gray area. So it's very interesting the way that medicine is shifting nowadays.
Yeah, it's like telling them, I don't know, but I'm gonna go ask ChatGPT when I leave this room, and we'll put it together.
Like, sometimes patients, like, I hear, like, stories like, "I saw my doctor, like, YouTubing how to do something." That's great, that means that they're, like, double checking to make sure they're gonna do the right thing, or they're making like, it doesn't mean they don't know necessarily, it just means that they're gonna, like, freshen up on their skills or check something. I don't think that's a bad thing, but again, we come from different experiences.
Yeah, I think any patient who's listening who sees your doctor Googling something or YouTubing something, all that means is that they actually care about what they're about to do to you or for you.
Yeah,
We are forced to learn so much information that you just can't retain it all. So every so often, you're going to need to. I think the difference is when we look something up, it's like refreshing a memory as opposed to like a shock, like new thing coming at
exactly.
us at
Yeah.
that time. I did want to piggyback off of something you said earlier, which is kind of a general thing that I've learned from all my patients. And that's when we are having our meetings to list people for transplant. And the big takeaway that I have is that patients are so much more than what's in their medical chart. Um, Especially, it's very interesting when we have these meetings and patients who are being listed for transplant have met with, we'll just stick with heart transplants here. So they've met cardiologists, cardiothoracic surgeons, palliative care, nutritionists, psych, social work, our transplant coordinators, everything. And so then all of us come together on these meetings. And it's so very clear at times, people who are sitting in on the meeting who are giving their opinion who have not met the patient. And of course, that happens all the time because every doctor and every nurse and every person in our network cannot meet this patient that we're listing. And so, say there's something questionable um, in their chart. We'll say that they've like no showed a bunch of appointments, for example. And so on the electronic medical record, it'll just be like, oh, they no showed, they no showed, they no showed. And then it's like you go and speak with them, and it's like, well, they were a 20-something-year-old kid who was like in the best shape of their life, and they were trying to like have a college athletic career, so they were missing appointments because they were feeling okay at the time and were trying to, do this, and then all of a sudden they crash because they were young and they were compensating for a while. And you might have people who see all these no-show appointments and just automatically assume that this patient isn't engaged in the healthcare system, that they don't come to appointments, that they worry that they're not going to take their medications, and et cetera, et cetera. And then if you had actually talked to the patient, you would have seen like this whole background of and reasoning why. And thankfully, most of the time, somebody has met with them and has talked to them about that and advocates on the patient's behalf. But it does lead to a lot of misconceptions about people, in a world where we have so many issues with people getting access to healthcare. It can really start to muddy the waters if you don't try and learn why people are doing certain things certain ways. And so that was one of the major things that I learned this year from my patients.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that. I mean, it makes sense because the committee is probably filled with people who have not met the patient, but there's probably some of the patient's direct specialists on there too. Interesting.
Yeah, and one of the best things that I've seen is when you're able to invite a physician that's been following the patient for years, to our meetings. That has been really insightful because then it gives such a better idea of the patient's behavior patterns, and willingness to work with the healthcare system. And again, this is about giving someone a donated organ, and you want that organ and the patient to survive for as long as possible. So obviously everything gets talked about. But for the most part, I think people are given the benefit of the doubt. I think it's just a lot of times if you have 10 heart failure doctors in your practice, maybe only one or two of them have met the patient, but all 10 of them might have logged in that day and they're hearing a story, and they might have an opinion that you have to say, hey, listen, I hear your concerns, but that's not the case here.
Right, right, of course. Um, Another question that would be great if I guess we could both answer this one, but one thing that when I sometimes do lectures, like, or grand rounds, like, I feel like a lot of doctors or nurses or clinicians will ask me, like, "What's one thing that you wish that more clinicians, people on the hospital side understood about the patient experience given your experiences?" And so, I always like to give, like, a few things that I've learned that people could take away, but I think one major thing that people don't realize, and you kind of already talked about this already, but people don't realize when we're in the hospital as physicians, like, that patient is like, the assessment and plan, like, on our end might look perfect and clean, but for the patient, that is, like, the most difficult day of their lives, and so I always tell people, give patients grace, like, to you and then, sometimes with us even, like, I'll be like, "Oh, they're in shock, but they're only on 1 presser," right? Like, it's obvious to, like, forget that, like, that 1 presser is a big deal for this patient, and so I always tell people, like, one thing is to just know that, like, you've never been in the patient's shoes and you don't know how important, how crazy, how chaotic, how sad, how angry this day is making them. They don't, and that's not their fault. Like sometimes we forget that these little things for us that's so easy to explain might be like the biggest day of the patient's lives, which you kind of touched upon. But that's one thing that I like to tell other clinicians. Are there specific things that you wish people wouldn't say? Like I know that people never mean this in the wrong way, but I've even heard it from fellow physicians, nurses who have taken care of me, but they usually say something like, "Oh, like, you're so young, like, poor you," They almost, like, make me feel worse for having gone through what I've been through, and I know it's not because, like, it's not meant to be out of maliciousness, but sometimes it just comes off wrong. Do you ever get that, and how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think, mostly from older patients who are just like, look at me and they're like, "You're so young," and it's just like, "Yeah, I know." But like young people need heart transplants too. Like there's
Yep.
babies that get heart transplants. But I think it's just one of those things where I just like let it roll off my shoulders now. It's like it doesn't even phase me. I think more than anything, it's just like hopefully people are willing to learn and kind of understand that chronic illness is not something for the elderly. If they've had that kind of belief before. Um, um, I think additionally, I think that just the idea of sometimes people don't have a filter, I guess, is and that comes from
Yeah,
patients and physicians where they just sometimes say what
right.
comes to them, and it's all kind of going to be willingness to um, learn from
Like, not let it get
the
to you.
experience. And I think, um, I can't say, I'm thinking ahead if I've said something wrong. And I think, I guess what I'll say is, based off of kind of leading there, is that it's okay to apologize. Um, I think that's something we as physicians should be willing to do. And I think patients appreciate it.
Mhm.
Even if it's as simple, I recently just told a patient that I would come back to his room in the afternoon. And I never went back. And I didn't go back because told him I would come back and discuss updated interventions from a additional specialist that we had come and see him, and the other specialist had never come and seen him, so I had nothing to go back and talk to him about. But he the next day was like, "You said you were going to come back, and you never came back." And I was just like, "You're right, and I'm sorry." Um, and I think
Right.
they're ready to just fight you on that, and then all of a sudden you say,
Yeah.
"You're right, I'm sorry," and they're like, "Wait a minute." And,
Sorry, yeah.
maybe they're not used to hearing that. But I think it's important. And um, I just said it. I'm going to say it again. Medicine is just about human to human interaction. And then it comes physician to physician, physician to nurse, nurse to nurse, nurse to patient, like everywhere. That's what the biggest part of our job is. And I think when people start to realize that, it becomes a much more enjoyable job um, and a much easier place to navigate on both ends, right? If you're a patient, you're probably, like you said, where you're dealing with the worst day of your life.
Mhm.
And if you take a step back and realize this doctor might be seeing 30 patients that day, and then has to get home to like a baby that's not sleeping, or
His
you have
twins.
no idea, right? It's like you
Yeah.
so if we give people grace, it goes a long way.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up. I do feel like sometimes, you know, I do think sometimes patients also need to understand that, we do like there are a lot of things that I promise you that your doctor agrees with you on. It's just the system doesn't make it always possible. So like even the whole thing where sometimes you don't have more than a couple minutes to spend with the patient doesn't mean that you don't care. It just means that there's other things you need to go do and you still love your job and you still love being there for the patient. So I do think you're right. It's a two-way street. Give both parties grace and it's easier said than done, but I do wish that more patients understood that there are a lot of things that we also want changed in the system but unfortunately can't change at the moment, so we can only do our best.
On the flip side of that is though patients should constantly advocate for themselves. Just
Mhm.
because you're worried about the staff, talking badly about you as soon as they walk out of the room or something like that. Like this is your health, your life at risk here, and you have to be your own greatest advocate because if you're not going to be, no one else is. If people
Right.
listen to a lot of our episodes, you can go back and listen to our episode where we had my friend Matt Brady come on, who's like 30 something years into his transplant. And he
Post
talks about how he is the squeakiest wheel of squeaky wheels. I don't know. It works for him. So, and he proudly says it because he's been in he had a heart transplant at 7 years old. So him and his mom have been
right.
dealing
I
with this
remember that.
forever. And I remember him just being full fledged, like this is what I do, and I'm not. He wasn't ashamed at all, and it's gotten him 30 something years with just a single heart transplant. So, um, can't say he's
Yeah,
wrong.
I agree
That's
with
for
that.
sure.
I agree with that for sure.
Just finish by saying like there's a lot of cliches that are said just in general, um, but I think they can apply to medicine maybe more than ever and like more than other situations. And that is um, people were people will remember how you made them feel more than what you said. And given that medicine is pretty much like its own language, if you walk into a room and just say medical nonsense to a patient who's not, doesn't have health literacy the way that people who have lived it like me and you, they're not going to care what you said. They're only going to
Right.
care about how you delivered it and how you made them feel. If you're telling people, for example, for me, if I tell people they need a heart transplant, they don't hear anything else I said. All they heard was that they need a heart transplant. And they're just going to remember how I acted after that and how kind of like optimistic or hopeful or anything else I was. So I think, and that goes too for and I'll say it again for patients. So if you're gonna just like yell at your physicians and be rude and everything like that, your doctors are just gonna remember that. They're gonna say that's the
Yeah,
patient that just
it's
made
very
made me
true.
feel like garbage. And again, that's where we have this really unique ability to be on both sides of this. Like our our the title of our podcast is silly and whatever, but
Both
it's true,
sides of it's very
right?
true.
And so I think it's interesting, and hopefully people will resonate with this that it's true. It's just about how you make people feel, and the medical knowledge and care will come with it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
All right, that's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed chatting about it. And hopefully, you can listen again monthly as we continue to put these out.
Episodes. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at both sides of the stethoscope. And then also you can reach us via email at both sides of the stethoscope at gmail.com. Yeah, I'm really excited. Hopefully we can get these videos moving because I do think that this is uh, a cooler medium to at least evolve into as me and Kobe do more of these both sides of the stethoscope episodes.